Today I came across this meme, the 1% embracing the end of the world for some reason, the rest of the 99%. Yeah, I improved the grammar there. Now, why is this? Now, a lot of people are going to tell you, well, the 1% are just straight up evil. And yeah, a lot of the 1% are just straight up evil. You can look up the studies showing that the 1%, the richest people in the world, have a high degree of psychopathy and various other mental illnesses, including narcissism, that make them absolutely a detriment to society because they have the money to then do the most damage that your average poor psychopath or poor narcissist would never be able to achieve. Now, there are some in the 1% who are not absolute POSs, but what about the rest? And it really comes down to they're just separated from the consequences of their actions. To illustrate this, I'm going to talk about the income tax and progressive taxation and how it disproportionately affects the lower class. Why does it disproportionately affect the lower class? Very simply, there is a set amount of money that you need to live comfortably. The average varies state to state, region to region in those states, but there is a set amount of money that you have to live comfortably with a bit of variance. Once you've made that amount of money, you're good. Now, why does this matter? Well, I'm going to throw out some numbers here. They're not official numbers, but they're just being used to illustrate the point. If I make $500,000 and am taxed at half of that, I may grumble about the taxes. I may try to get out of having to pay half my income. But at the end of the day, if I fail at getting out of having to pay taxes, I will be left with $250,000. Now, if the amount to live comfortably is $48,000 and I have $250,000, I'm still going to live quite comfortably. Now, let's say I make $50,000 and I'm taxed at 10%. That's 5,000 off. I am now below the amount of money to live comfortably. As you can see from this simple example, progressive taxation does negatively impact the lower classes who cannot afford to lose as much money compared to the upper classes. Now, why does this matter? The same effect happens with inflation and other economic issues. When your food costs double and you don't have the money to eat that cost, that hurts you. But the people living at the top, the upper class, the 1%, the rich, they can simply eat the costs of doubling food costs. They can simply eat the costs of rising fuel costs. They can simply eat the costs of housing, of all the other issues affecting civilization. And worse, they have access to time saving mechanisms and money to invest. This allows them to have access to means to offset any pain that they would experience or just the time to increase the revenue earning potential. And that is, again, something the lower classes do not have. Now, there's a certain argument among certain academic circles that the upper class are just innately superior, something that the upper classes would love to believe, not recognizing the fact that sociologically, because they were born into wealth, they were taught a certain way and had access to certain, I don't want to use the word privileges, but certain means, let's say it that way, that the lower classes who do not have access to that kind of money cannot afford. For example, cooking your meals is a time consuming process. Time is a resource that can be spent and is better spent in other pursuits. It makes sense for the upper classes to pay other people to make their meals for them or to eat out more because they can then use that time on other pursuits. But if you are poor, you cannot afford to hire other people to make your meals for you. In fact, it is a bad idea to even eat out a lot. Now, let's apply that principle further. When you look at the upper classes, say like I make 500,000 a year again. Well, I don't need the full 500,000. I could buy a lot of luxury with that 500,000. So I can cut back on the hours to pursue other things. I can invest in my own small business pursuits. I can invest in other businesses because I have the revenue to do so. Or I could just lock that money into bonds, stocks, and other things that produce dividends or will increase in value as time goes forward. And because I have these investments, say I eventually hit a point where I suffer a major issue, say an injury, or I lose my job, or we hit significant financial hardships, I can then liquidate my investments and then I will be secure. The lower classes do not have access to this safety net. And a lot of people in the upper class, they forget the privilege that wealth brings them. And I don't mean privilege in the leftist sense, I mean privilege as in the linguistic sense. There are things that wealth affords you, and taking advantage of that allows them to live more comfortably. But because they have access to these things, they are disconnected from a lot of the consequences that the vast majority of people then have to experience. If you remain wealthy, it doesn't matter to you that the middle class shrinks. It doesn't matter to you how hard the lower classes experience life. Inflation is not really that much of a concern for you, nor is filling up your tank. There are plenty of stories where rich people just throw around $100 tip just because they're feeling generous and to thank people for doing really monotonous tasks for them. And I don't hate the rich people. I want to be rich. I want to be the kind of guy who could pull out $200, give it to some person that just drove out to pick up a few pool toys because I didn't want to do it myself. A story I heard at one point in time that was pretty good. That's the kind of wealth I want to have. And so I'm not going to hate myself if I acquire that kind of wealth. At the same point in time, when I can throw out $200 for someone to come pick up a few pool toys, inflation is not going to be a big concern of mine. Yet, because I came up lower class or middle class, I will have the knowledge that this will negatively impact other people. So, a lot of times, the upper classes are not inherently trying to be evil. They're just so separated from the consequences of the political reality going on and unfolding before us that they don't see an issue. And unfortunately, this is no different than just being evil on a pragmatic level because the lower classes see the upper classes with complete indifference to their suffering, and that just feels a sense of class warfare. And that is a small part of this larger issue. Like and subscribe for more content. I'll see you in the next video.